we're going to talk about the gaming industry itself, because this is a particularly pertinent topic that you can use for assignment 2. I think that might make more sense when I talk about assignment 2, which I'll do after I get through this. This is a very short lecture, there's only like 15, 16 slides, something like that. But I want to start with this. Cyberpunk 2077. Do we have anyone who's played Cyberpunk? Just Zach. And me, I will add. Zach, did you manage to get any length of time into the game?
Fair amount. I think on Steam, not a lot, but like 30 hours.
That's pretty good going.
But I could not play it when it first came out, so I took like about 2-3 weeks off.
Okay.
All of the glitches at the beginning was just unplayable for me. But it was funny when I played it, because all the glitches were also really funny. But
what were you playing it on?
PC.
PC, okay, yeah, a particularly egregious release. I first picked it up on PlayStation 4, where it was completely unplayable. It basically wouldn't load. And when it did load, nothing really happened and you couldn't do anything, which was a bit frustrating to say the least. PC release was pretty bad from what I understand as well. And now, 3 years on, apparently it's a really good game. Apparently all the glitches have been fixed, there's been DLCs released, it's something worth playing now, but I think a lot of people are of the same opinion as me. You screwed me. You screwed me, Project CD. Get in the scene, I don't fucking care about your stupid game anymore, and I cannot be bothered doing 70 hours of a game that actually screwed me first time round. The reasons why it was released in such a terrible state are really, really important in understanding the contemporary gaming industry. One, Project CD had already delayed the game by years, and they were basically running out of time. Now, if you don't know any of the background to the company, Project CD are the company that makes the Witcher series. So this is actually one of the biggest game development companies. I don't want to call them just a game company, they're much larger than that. On the back of the Witcher series, they're one of the bigger ones in the world now. They're based in Poland, which is unusual. They're outside the main game development countries, America and Japan. That adds challenges to how they can actually go about developing games themselves. And game development is a distributed activity. So the people who are working on projects on this game, especially actually as a lot of the final, or what we call crunch coding, came during COVID, they were distributed around the world. So you had a company which is large, but mortgaged a large amount of its future on the success of this game, which was already heavily delayed. They needed to get it out. They also saw a window. In COVID, they saw a window, nothing was coming out. They thought, if we can get this out, it's going to be us and nothing else at this point. There's no competition that we have here for a major game like this, so we need to hit this time for it. In order to meet their deadline, which was sort of August, September 2020, the people who were working on the game were basically asked to do 100+ hour weeks in order to get the game finished. Who's got a job? Okay. How many hours a week?
This week I did 23.
23, wonderful. 12, good. How much?
How many hours? No, 0 hours.
0 hours. I'm supposed to do 37. I probably did more than that, but it's supposed to be 37. I was fucking marking last night. It was a Sunday night, for fuck's sake. But, 37 hours. 100 hours. Holy shit, I've never worked a 100-hour week in my life. There's a fairly good possibility that most months I haven't worked 100 hours, let alone a week. So, that's not like for a week. This is for months in order to get that game out. Now, this is a practice which is really well established, unfortunately, in the games industry. The worst culprits for it are Rockstar. They've been doing this kind of nonsense with games for years, where they basically get people to pull in phenomenal hours in order to get games ready. But what's increasingly been happening over the past 5 years is, even though the industry is demanding people do this kind of practice, games are still not coming out ready. so many games now come out broken, it's untrue. And it's almost a folly to buy a game on the release day now, because you're going to get a patch within 3 days to fix something which has gone wrong. So companies aren't even interested now in getting the game out in a playable state. They say, we'll fix that afterwards, we just want to get the first day sales first of all. And why are first day sales really important? There's something that happens on the first day that, as time goes on, doesn't happen. Any ideas? Okay, Cyberpunk, when it comes out in 2020, does anyone know what it cost? Just go for a console version.
Oh, because it was the most when it first comes out.
Exactly. There's a premium costing for first day, and you've always got 2 versions as well. You've got the base version and the deluxe version. So, Spider-Man 2, right, which I'm thinking of purchasing this week, it's still up for like 80 quid as the deluxe version, and the base version is 70, I think, 69.99, something like that. It's like, well, in 3 months it's not going to be that. So actual first day sales are really important in terms of maximising revenue. But what you're actually doing with first day sales is saying, I'm going to buy a product which is completely bust, and then I'm relying on them to fix it at some point. It's kind of very, very strange way of doing things. This was a disaster because of the publicity it generated. It was the masters of their own demise in many ways, Project CD, because they didn't have any competition. So there was no other games to compare it to. It was a quiet time. Like the day or 2 days after it came out, it was during the pandemic, and I was sitting at home watching BBC News on like a 24-hour stint of watching BBC News, because that's one of the things I did do in the pandemic. And this was one of the headline stories. It was like, video game comes out and it's shit. That was basically the BBC story. It was like, this company has mortgaged its entire future, spent $340 million in development of this game, and it's come out and it's completely broken, and gamers are up in arms about it. And it's like, okay, well, we've crossed over a line here in popular culture, because this is a problem that's been familiar for some time, where games have been released where they haven't been in a state where they can be enjoyable. And all the things that we've been talking about games in this module, the idea of play and flow, and character realization, narrative, that are so important to making good games. None of this worked in this game. And it's like, no wonder people were playing it thinking, after a couple of hours, like, I'm not playing this anymore. This is complete rubbish. Like, this is terrible. I've just spent 60, 70 quid on a game that is totally rubbish. So, it's a microcosm. It was like the perfect storm in a lot of ways. These issues exist with most games, but this crystallized a huge number of the issues with games. And it's an issue really because when we look at the numbers that are involved here, it's insane. This is the value of the games industry in the year of COVID. Okay, so you can see the increase in this graph through that 2020 year. Everyone's locked away. What are we all doing? Well, we're probably all doing a myriad of things, but a lot of us were playing video games, right? Buying video games, because there was literally all else to do. So the total value of the video game industry in 2020 was $165 billion. Take Hollywood, the music industry, streaming, shove them all together, it's less than that. The breakdown is really, really interesting. Mobile game industry worth $85 billion in that year. PC, $40 billion. And the console industry, $33 billion. So the console industry was actually worth less than the rest. But there's a very significant reason for that. The console industry was in stasis at that point because everyone was waiting for PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X to come out. It was the end of a cycle period. Nobody was actually buying new consoles. The only thing that was selling hardware-wise was Switch, which is a lower-end console in terms of price. So you could sell 1 million Switches, but that would be, if you sold 250,000 PS5s, it would actually be worth more. So So basically we're all hanging on and waiting for the launch of those big ones there. But the industry itself was massive during that period. See huge increases in cloud gaming during COVID as well, because people can't go to shops to buy things. I think that's in time we're going to look at COVID and think that's the end of physical games. That was the point where everyone switched, basically, because you literally couldn't go and buy any anyway. So that's going to be the end point. This is why this issue is a huge thing, because you now have an industry that is worth more than anything else in media, who are committed to releasing crap. Because the practices that they have in terms of making games themselves, the entire industry practice is basically based around the idea that we're going to release shit and people won't care because we'll fix it afterwards. It's like, that's not really a great customer service message. It's like, you know, Nick, you're a loyal customer. We're going to take your money because you're going to give it to us, but we're not going to give you a product which is worth having. What fucking industry does that to the customers and gets away with it? It's like, you know, if I went to McDonald's in town and they handed me a raw burger, I said, yeah, we'll cook it later. Fuck you, cook it now, you know, son of a bitch, I'm eating this raw shit. But that's kind of how the gaming industry treats its fucking gamers. It's like, you know, yeah, we're going to give you this raw game, we'll fix it afterwards. 6 months down the line, this is going to be great. Fuck you, 6 months. I might be dead in 6 months. I lead a very rock and roll lifestyle. You know, I could OD at any time. 6 months is the time scale I don't want to work on. So, what can we take from this beautiful visualization? The growth in the game industry is absolutely colossal. It tells us that more and more people are playing games. More and more people, importantly, are investing their disposable income into the game industry than ever before. But the game industry is producing more and more rubbish than it ever has before. Or at least, if I was being really generous, what I would say is the game industry is producing things which it will fix in the future. But that doesn't sound like a very equitable exchange to me, because you're always contingent on the idea that they will actually fix it. Some games never get fixed. Some games remain pretty much dog games all the way through. So, I think this is a massive problem, to be fair. So, as I said, it's 165 billion the industry was worth. That is a rise from 78 billion in 2017. That is a more than a twofold rise in the value of the industry in 3 years. That's not just huge numbers, but huge growth as well. 180 billion in 2021. So things didn't regress after COVID. They actually kept on going forwards. You know, and value kept on being added, albeit it's a smaller rise. But $15 billion. You know, if somebody came and gave me $15 billion, I'd be happy with that. You know, I think results. I'm not going to work anymore. As a comparison, Hollywood's net worth for all the films and all historic releases that have been produced by Hollywood, that goes to streaming services, anyone out there who's still buying physical copies of films, was worth 99 billion in that same year. So it's nearly double the value of the Hollywood industry. When we break down that, the Asia Pacific region is the biggest region for games, worth 72 billion in 2020. So you deduct that, the whole rest of the world is nearly the same as the Asia Pacific region. So the spending on games is quite concentrated. You know, Europe comes in second, United States comes in third in terms of that industry size. And all of this is predicated on one thing, which would have made more sense if I did the lecture 2 weeks ago, but unfortunately I wasn't here. This is a massive industry with a toxic, hyper-masculine culture embedded in it. And, you know, some theorists like D'Annunzio have linked the idea that you can get away with putting out broken stuff because of that toxic, hyper-masculine culture. It's not about, you know, getting things right. It's about getting things out to make as much profit as possible. Don't worry about if the consumer thinks this is okay. We're just going to take their money. what's interesting with this graph, this is British figures alone. Boxed software is a really small part of the industry now. And by box software, physically bought copies. It's incredibly small, which is worth looking at. But even in software in the UK, just in the UK figures, $4.55 billion, billion pounds, I should say. What's mad is that the UK government has no strategy for video game development. None whatsoever. The Welsh government has no strategy for video game development. Do you know how many games companies, just as a guess, are based in Wales?
Oh,
It's possibly more than people might think, but it's not that many.
10.
It's a little higher. Yeah, it's depending on how you define it, it's somewhere between 19 and 24, depending on how you define it. There should be more. There really should be more, to be fair, but there's no strategy to underpin how we develop this, which is really, really disappointing. We're talking about a $1 billion industry in the UK, and we have like 20 companies in Wales involved in this, and they're all very small. So, I mean, one of the next projects I'm going to do is going to be about this. It's going to be like the gaming industry in Wales and why is it so small? Because there's no technical reason why it should be. We've got all the skills here, we just haven't got the support for it. Basically, I'm going to kick the Welsh government, which is always fun. We can look at the industry itself in two distinct phases. 1970 to 1986, the game industry, as Emquist describes it, this is a direct quote from that paper, unstable and immature. It sounds like me, to be honest. In this period, you saw rapid growth cycles and quick crashes of companies, best exemplified by the Atari company, who were, for a long period of time, from like 78 through to 83, were one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world, and then completely went bankrupt and disappeared off the face of the earth because they literally went bust. And that cycle happened quite a lot during that period. From the mid-80s, you see the development of established companies in both hardware and software. In particular, the emergence of Nintendo as a global player is very important here. Nintendo became a very stable, conservative, very valuable force within the gaming industry, stabilizing force. What's interesting there is that Nintendo's main rival in that early period was Sega, who were a company who dropped out of producing games hardware in 1999 because basically they were forced out, so there was still some collapses. Sega didn't go bankrupt or anything like that, they just thought, we're just not doing this anymore because we're never going to get a market. Microsoft had come in, Sony had come in, and they thought, we can't compete with those two, they're too big for us. So Nintendo were already bigger than them, and they thought, nobody's going to buy if there's 4 consoles out there, we're going to get squeezed, so we're not going to do this anymore. From 87 to 2005, you've got very, very stable growth in the industry. 87, everything starts to plateau out, and things from there, the industry grows year on year. There is no contraction after that point. The industry gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It doesn't spike in huge ways really until 2020, when COVID hits and you see a massive spike in video game revenues. But everything steadily goes upwards, and big points of entry happen. In 1994, you get Sony enters the video game market with the PlayStation. Does anyone know the story of the PlayStation, the original one? Let me tell you a story. PlayStation, released in 1994, was never supposed to happen. It was never built to happen as a console by Sony. Has anyone ever played an original PlayStation? No? You're too young. You don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, yeah. If you've ever played an original PlayStation, and if you've ever seen a Super Nintendo, one thing will always strike you between the two. The controllers look almost identical to one another. And the reason for that is Sony were building Nintendo a CD drive. That's what the PlayStation was. Sony were contracted to Nintendo to build them a CD drive for their existing console, the Super Nintendo console. And for some unbeknownst reason, which no one has ever been able to adequately explain, Nintendo turned around at the end of 1993 and told them they didn't want it, even though they'd done all this work. Sony had done all this development for them. Obviously, they paid them for it. They weren't like pissed because like it's not like somebody came and fixed your roof and then you told them to fuck off. Like they pay them. They'd given them all the money, but Sony were like, "What the fuck, man? We've just spent like years developing this really cool bit of kit to advance your company, and now you're telling us you don't want it." So Sony just turned around and thought, "Fuck it, we're going to just release it ourselves." And they kind of booted Nintendo out of the dominance of the market in one fell swoop, because they had this thing which they had mass produced as well. Sony had produced a lot of them, and they're just like, if you look at the original PlayStations, there's a slot underneath the original first issue of them, and the slot is there to remove, so you can link it to a Super Nintendo via a cable. And that never got used, obviously, but it's right. The first generation of them have this little expansion port in it, which you can just basically slot into the Super Nintendo, and you have this whiz-bang machine. The Nintendo said, "No, we don't want it."
Why?
And within a year,
Why?
nobody knows. It's really strange. Nobody has. Nintendo have never spoken about it, because they're that kind of company. They're weird, and they were developing their own console, the N64, which came out in 1996. The SO ended in 1995, but they've never come up with an adequate explanation of why that is. So like Sony never intended to be a video games company, ever. They were just making hardware for another company. And in fact, the PlayStation was going to come out with no Sony branding on it whatsoever. It was going to be branded a Nintendo product. And there's, you can go and look at pictures online, and it's like, that's a PlayStation with a Nintendo badge on it, but that's how it was going to be. Nobody really knows why, but Nintendo screwed up, basically. So that was a big entry. The other big entry point is in 2000 when Microsoft released the original Xbox console, which is kind of a cool console, the original Xbox, if you want to hit somebody, because it weighs about 4.5 tons and is like so. And was so noisy that it sounded like a jet was taking off in your house. If you like, after about 2 minutes of playing something, the fans were kicking and you couldn't hear a fucking thing about what was going on. I think they were responsible more than anyone for headphones being a part of gaming, because you had to wear headphones because you couldn't hear a damn thing if you had that thing on. It sounded like somebody was hoovering in front of you when you were trying to play. It wasn't great. So with those, you see increases in growth at each of those pinch points as well. The really important part of the whole industry now is the concept of AAA games. So we have different categorizations for how games are marketed and how they are developed. AAA games are the big games. The reason why this is so important is because the entire industry actually hinges on these games. I'll give you some stats in a minute about why this is, but these games have to succeed or the entire industry will collapse, basically. So AAA games are the most important thing. And as we see over time, the amounts that companies have put into the development of games has risen exponentially. So Halo 3 in 2007 was the most expensive game ever made. At that point, and we have a long history then of collecting stats about how expensive games were. 30 million to develop, and it was important in this particular aspect. The marketing budget was more than the actual development budget. That was the first time you got a AAA game where they said, right, it's going to cost us 30 million to develop, which was astronomical money in 2007, but we're actually going to invest more in marketing. The reason being, well, does anyone know why that was? Do you all know Halo? You know what I'm talking about, right? You know Halo is an exclusive to Microsoft. You can't play it on anything else. So why in 2007 do you think that was a big thing?
The Xbox 360 was not coming out.
Absolutely spot on. 360 had kind of had a soft release before that, but that was the big game that they were tying the release to. So it had been out a couple of months. Nobody was talking about it. There was no buzz around the 360 at that point. So they tied the big launch of the 360 to that game in specific. Here's the best game ever made, here's the most expensive game ever made, etc., etc. And they spent $40 million on just promoting the game as an appendage to the console itself. Interestingly, Microsoft also went heavy on the price of this. So you could buy an Xbox 360 but you could buy a bundle which cost the same. So they were selling the 360 at less cost than, you know, they were going to take a hit on every 360 sold if you bought Halo 3, because they wanted 360s in people's houses. You know, you think about anything. Okay, yeah, well, they're going to make money in the long term if you actually own the console and start buying games through their store. By 2012, the most expensive game ever to be produced is Grand Theft Auto 5, 265 million to develop and market. So we've gone from 70 million combined cost to 265 in that period, nearly a fourfold increase. Fast forward 5 years, that's a doubling for Red Dead Redemption 2, 540 million combined budget in terms of marketing and development costs. So Cyberpunk 2077 was a bargain at the end of the day, $316 million. Result, that's cheap. They actually made a profit before the game came out. Pre-orders of the game meant that they had accrued in excess of 316 million budget before the game was ever released. But that's the kicker, right? People were really excited for the game and had pre-ordered the game. And then when they got it, it was like, this is a complete piece of shit. I have bought something which is completely fucking useless. What are you doing to me? Why are you doing this? 18 million copies were sold in total in that first period, which is pretty good. That's a pretty impressive, you know, sales thing. You know, it's made them a lot of money at the end of the day, but it's also made them kind of hated. You know, CD Projekt didn't like, fuck you guys. And definitely not as much as was hoped. That company pinned this game down as being their Red Dead Redemption, their Grand Theft Auto. They were going to make this game, and then there would be sequels afterwards, and there would be spin-offs, and there'd be a whole bunch of Paratech stuff, and everyone's going to be walking around in costumes from the game, and everyone's going to be doing their face like characters from the game, and none of that ever happened. They thought they were developing a cultural phenomena here. There's no accent, you know, I don't know how much Keanu Reeves cost for that game, but he cost a lot. You know, for him to act in it, that was big money that they spent on that. They were expecting this to tap into the zeitgeist. Why Keanu Reeves? It was like zeitgeist when I was a kid. I mean, people like Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
Yeah, people still like Keanu Reeves? Shit, that guy is durable as fuck, man.
Girls love him.
Yeah, he can't act. He's a fucking awful actor. I hope people know that. I mean, he's cool. I like Keanu. I really like him. He's a nice guy. He seems like a really good guy, but he cannot act. The only character he can play is like somebody who's like, huh? Do you know what I mean? That's the only, because that's him. He just plays himself. If you want to see how bad Keanu Reeves is as an actor, there's a 1992 film called Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he plays Jonathan Harker from the classic novel, and he has to have an English accent. I beg you to watch it. It is so funny. He can't hold an English accent for more than 3 words before he slips into his own accent. It is hilarious. And you think, that's a Francis Ford Coppola movie. He did multiple takes. That was the best one. Holy shit, they must have been bad. There's another film he's in where he tries to do a southern accent, which is hilarious. This is why AAA games are really important. Only 1 in 25 games released are profitable. Only 1 in 25 games released in the contemporary market actually make money. Back in 2013, I know this is 10 years ago now, but the figures haven't budged. The top 20 games sold per year in any given year will bring in 80% of the total global revenue of games. And this is why companies are really keen on 2 things. Keeping games as alive as possible. So like, the developers of Fortnite are never going to do Fortnite 2. They don't need to, because this game is still making them money. You know, that's why GTA 5 has been released for 10 years. It's still, that game is still like top 10 everywhere in the world in terms of sales every freaking year. So that game is still responsible for a huge chunk of the global market in terms of video game revenues. So don't break what, you know, don't take it away. We'll milk that cow until it dies, basically. Basically, those top 20 games, we're talking AAA titles, are responsible for keeping the games industry alive. If it wasn't for those games, there wouldn't be a games industry, because the revenues would be absolutely minimal. So what typically you get is a company will look to have one giant game. On the back of that, they can fund other games, and if they get another hit out of it, result. But they're not looking for that. They recognise that actually what we're doing with the other games we develop is taking pot shots and hoping that things will be okay. But if they don't work out, we still have Minecraft. Minecraft will keep making us the money. So we can actually develop these other things and hope for the best. You know, EA can look at it and think, EA is the fucking one who's cracked this in particular, because they don't even develop new games. They look at it and they think, what are our biggest games? We've got Sims, we're going to do one of them like every 10 years. We've got FIFA/EA, we're going to put the same game out every year. We've got Madden, we're going to put the same game out every year. And then some of the other stuff might hit. You know, we've also got NBA 2K, which people, and the same people are going to buy those games every year. So we know this, basically they've got a fixed revenue. They know, like, shit, everyone's going to buy these things. So that's our revenue base. Now we can develop some other interesting stuff around that, but it doesn't have to make money. You know, because we know we're going to make money. So if something else hits big, yes, result. If one of these Need for Speed titles comes out and people are really into it, well, we're just going to make more money. But it's not a big deal if it doesn't. You know, we've already got these 3-4 massive selling titles, which we know are going to be big selling titles. That's why I kind of hate EA, because they don't have to innovate. So the biggest game they've brought out this year as an original is Dead Space, which is a remake of a game that came out 15 years ago. It's not original in any way, shape or form. It's kind of cool, I kind of like the game, but it's, fuck you EA. Will you ever release something which is original? No. You know, that company has no original thought whatsoever. They don't have, they're all like 60-year-old men in EA, I'm sure of it, like smoking cigars and drinking scotch and thinking, what's our strategy for next year? Let's just make another couple of $1 billion on the shit that we've been making all these years in the past, like, you know. We're not going to do anything different.
How much does like FIFA make them? Because it's just every year, and I stopped playing it a few years ago, and I just can't understand.
But you will replace with somebody else, don't worry about
that's what I mean, and because football is like obviously the biggest sport in the world, it's just going to keep on
It's going to be really interesting to see how much this non-FIFA branded one is going to make. I got a sneaky suspicion that it's going to make no difference whatsoever having the FIFA association with it. It's a little. One of the problems with EA as a company is they're shifty fuckers, and they will never actually put out their figures about how much they earn. But you could be safe in estimating that, you know, for a game that actually costs very little in terms of development cost, because they've built the engine already. So all of it they're basically doing is updating stats and graphics, basically, you know, and the graphic updates are cutaways usually. It's not going to take them that long to do that. They're not putting in 100 million. I mean, the biggest cost for that game was the licensing from FIFA, which they've got rid of now. But they're doing individual licensing deals with like Premier League and stuff like that. But you can guarantee they're saving money on that. If I'm going to make an estimate, and these are all figures I'm kind of pulling out of the air, but I bet they don't spend this year on that version that came out this year $100 million in development. Sales will be over the cycle of the game year, because their sales obviously drop rapidly when they get the new one out. It's got to be, it can't be under $1 billion. There's no way it can be under $1 billion. With the number of people who buy that game, and the number of people who play it, and the number of people who make transactions within it, there's absolutely no logical way it can be under $1 billion. So they're making at least the magnitude of 10. Now, actually, I suspect it's more like 4 or 5 billion, I would think. EA as a company make phenomenal amounts of money. I mean, they are minted. That's their biggest product. Madden, it's a lot less than that, but they do make good money out of it. The Sims makes ridiculous revenues from them every year. It's like, who's spending fucking money in The Sims? Well, a lot of people, is the truth of it, right? You know, a hell of a lot of people spend a hell of a lot of money in it. Okay, so we have this huge industry which is hinged upon these massive games that make massive amounts of revenue. Industry, though, itself is absolutely toxic. Techno-toxic masculinity is a great way of summing it up, and a horror show to actually work in. And Ergin Bulut's book is called The Precarious Game, and this is where I take a lot of this lecture from. The game industry thrives on creative destruction. It's a beautiful term with respect to technologies, but game development is more like destructive destruction. So, what is he trying to say here? The game industry itself, creative destruction is like we create to destroy. Game development is like destructive destruction, is in that game development is only interested in milking people who work in games until they absolutely crash out and cannot do anymore.
How do they convince people to work those many hours?
What would be attractive
Money.
about working in the games industry?
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know, has anyone ever thought about it?
I think like
It sounds cool. I mean, you can't deny it. It
Number
sounds
one,
cool.
that's I think the biggest draw right there. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
It's like you played video games as a kid. Wouldn't you love to make video games?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds really, really cool thing to do. Number one. What were you gonna say, yeah?
I said that the companies, they put like food, showers, everything, so people can
Live in there.
in there.
That whole kind of tech company vibe, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
you're gonna go to work and like there's games everywhere to play, and you know there's showers, and everyone's always got coffee and muffins and all this good shit. Like, you know, not like this fucking dump. You know, so yeah, that sounds cool, right? You know, this is a really cool place to be, and you know, and you're working with other people who are like you, and you know, it's a playful environment to work in. Fuck you, is it a playful work? And but I think that image you've got in your mind is exactly how a lot of games places are. Negating the fact that, you know, they put all those showers and beds there because you have to be there like 24 hours a day. Because in order to get this shit done, you've got to live there, basically, you know. And it's interesting to me, a lot of the games industry is centered around San Francisco. In that Bay Area, you've got, you know, Silicon Valley is just down the road, etc. And there's a lot of, EA, for example, was founded in San Francisco, right? And there's big offices there. And you know, San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. You know, it is full of tech companies, so the prices of real estate and like rental prices are astronomical. And a lot of people who work in the tech industry and the games industry rent like apartments in San Francisco for like $4,000 or $5,000 a month and never go there. Because they can't. They have to stay at work. You know, they're in work like 24/7. What's the point? Just live at work. And then you think of that and you think, live at work. That is the most grim fucking scenario I could ever think of. Like, you know, you should not live at work. You know, you should live as far away from work as possible. What freaks me out about people who like, you know, say you worked at like a boarding school as a teacher. That must be the most grim thing on earth. It's like you work there, then you live there. What's wrong with you? Or people who own a hotel, or people, you know, I don't know if you've ever stayed in like a B&B, but everyone who owns a B&B is a psychopath. And, you know, you understand why, because they live in the place they work in. That's not healthy. Get away, you know. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. There are 4 linked processes in the game development industry, basically, which lead to this state by which we have a toxic industry itself. Rationalization upon acquisition, spatialization, financialization, and precarization. I will explain each of these in turn because these are actually very technical terms themselves, but on the basic level, if you start with like a small indie company that's making an interesting game, what happens is that company tends to get acquired by a bigger one. So the industry rolls basically in the same way that a lot of tech industries do, where bigger companies look at interesting things that smaller companies do and acquire those companies. Upon acquisition, the smaller company tends to get what we call rationalized. So whatever working practices they had, they get changed to fit the bigger parent company, which is usually a big faceless conglomerate company that doesn't care about its workers. Spatialization refers to the spaces in which people work and get changed. So you actually get like physically moved to other places, which could be larger, it could be bigger centre of sort of concentration of the industry itself. The financialization aspect is that the smaller company will then not be judged on the quality of the product they're doing, but on how much that product makes in terms of money. And precarization, which I think is the whole industry is, instead of having a nice secure job with an indie company where you're making interesting games, now all of a sudden, if your game doesn't hit, you're all out. Its sole metric of whether you remain in the industry is, can you make a game that makes us that much money? And if you can't do that, well, we're going to get a new company in to make games instead, and we're going to ship all your people out. And even if you're working on a big game, it's like, well, we've got a ton of new programmers coming through. You're earning too much money, we're just going to give these guys a job from this point onwards. And precarious employment of that nature is a definitive feature of the video game industry. Nobody who works in the video game industry at a high level, in terms of programming and design, has a contract. That just doesn't exist anymore. Nobody is contracted to work by EA. EA hires you as an independent contractor. And when you're done, they'll let you go. Now they might hire you back, fine, you might get another gig. So when you're done programming 24, off you go. You're 6 months where you've got to find something to do. We'll get you back for 25. I've moved on, I've had to take this job. Well, fuck it, we've got a load of other people who can do exactly the same as you're doing. And we're not going to pay you well. In a relative sense, these people earn money, but they don't earn the money that is commensurate with the labour that they actually put in. Alright, let's take 5, and then I'll go through each of those points in a little bit more detail. It's grim, isn't it?